Picture being hurled into a slaughterhouse of war, encircled by the most lethal army on the planet, only to realize your own leaders equipped you with defective weapons. This is not just another tale from World War II. It is a story of betrayal at the highest level, staggering incompetence, and one of the boldest cover-ups in military history. For years, classified documents remain sealed inside British archives because the unfiltered truth about what 14,000 abandoned Australian soldiers achieved in the blazing Libyan desert was too humiliating for commanders in London to acknowledge. These men were written off and expected to surrender to General Erwin Rommel within days. Instead, when their unreliable weapons jammed and failed, they refused to raise a white flag. They shattered every rule of conventional warfare and carried out actions so daring and unauthorized that they stunned the German war machine and alarmed British High Commanding. April 1941, at the Libyan port of Tobruk, German artillery bombarded the defenses for 72 continuous hours. Dust, smoke, and scorching sand filled the air as 14,000 soldiers of the 9th Australian Division crouched in shallow trenches, gripping weapons that misfired constantly. British leadership in Cairo privately believed the garrison would collapse within 2 weeks. Rommel, fresh from victories in the desert, assumed surrender was inevitable. He did not realize the Australians had already begun doing something no army had attempted before. They discarded their faulty-issued weapons, slipped into the darkness, and raided enemy positions to steal what they needed. The equipment they had been given was shockingly inadequate. The Boys anti-tank rifle from 1939 was heavy and nearly useless against the frontal armor of Panzer III and Panzer IV tanks at real combat distances. Those specifications claimed it could penetrate 60 millimeters at 100 meters. That required a perfect angle and suicidal proximity. Brand machine guns, jammed in desert sandstorms due to their mechanism. Lee Enfield rifles suffered when extreme temperature shifts thickened weapon oil and caused misfires. Supplies arrived only by dangerous nighttime sea convoys across the Mediterranean under constant air attack. Sailors called the route the Tobruk. Ferry ships carried minimal food, water, and ammunition, and rarely delivered spare parts or modern anti-tank guns. By late April 1941, it was clear supplies would remain irregular and insufficient. A desperate inventory showed severe shortages of anti-tank guns, limited machine gun ammunition, and almost no spare Bren barrels. Entered General Leslie Morsehead, unlike aristocratic British officers in Cairo. He had managed a major shipping company before the war and thought in terms of resources, logistics, and unconventional solutions. His troops nicknamed him Ming the Merciless. Morsehead looked at the surrounded city and saw opportunity. Enemy territory around Tobruk was filled with supply depots, vehicles, and ammunition guarded carelessly, especially by Italian units. He made a controversial decision that defied British military doctrine. His men would treat enemy camps as a nighttime supply store. Small patrols of 4 to 8 men slipped out after midnight. Once the desert cooled, they removed shiny metal from uniforms and even wore thick socks over boots to silence their steps. They targeted vulnerable Italian positions because Rommel had placed Italian forces along outer lines while reserving German troops for major assaults. The Australians entered trenches, silently neutralized guards without gunfire, and emptied supply crates. Soon they captured German MP40s submachine guns. For soldiers struggling with unreliable weapons, the MP40 felt revolutionary. Its folding stock suited trench fighting, and its 9mm parabellum ammunition offered controllable recoil with strong stopping power. Most important, it functioned reliably in sand. Unlike their own weapons, they also sought the formidable MG34 machine gun, with a rate of fire between 800 and 900 rounds per minute, belt-fed ammunition, and quick barrel changes. It far outclassed the heavy water-cooled Vickers gun, the MG34. could be carried and operated by one soldier, giving unmatched mobility. Captured MG34s were immediately deployed in defensive lines. Italian guards often awoke to find weapons missing without a trace. Australian mechanics cleaned and mastered the captured equipment, turning it against its former owners. The impact was dramatic. When German infantry advanced expecting weak resistance, they were met with devastating fire from their own MG34s. Rommel later praised the Australian defense of Tobruk. In his memoirs, as an example of practical military genius, British officials in Cairo were horrified by reports that soldiers used captured German weapons. Regulations required fighting only with issued equipment. They complained about ammunition supply complications caused by 9mm rounds. Morshed responded bluntly that while bureaucrats wrote paperwork, his men were staying alive with stolen guns. The practice continued. By May 1941, one-third of Tobruk's transport fleet consisted of captured and repainted Axis vehicles, including trucks from companies such as Fiat and Lancia. Italian commanders often reported vehicles as destroyed rather than admit they had been stolen. One famous raid involved 6 Australians discovering an Italian field kitchen with fresh bread and meat stew. They waited until cooks left, then carried off the food and returned without firing a shot. The official report stated they conducted reconnaissance and secured supplementary rations. During the Easter battles of April 1941, Rommel's 5th Panzer Division attacked the southern sector. Australian trenches were dug narrow and shallow. As tanks rolled over them, soldiers pressed flat and survived beneath the tracks. After tanks passed, improvised grenades made from food tins packed with explosives were thrown. Captured MG34s unleashed heavy fire on following infantry. German troops heard the unmistakable sound of their own machine guns firing at them from Australian lines. The psychological shock was immense. The siege lasted 242 days. The 9th Australian Division repelled more than 30 major assaults. They captured vast quantities of enemy equipment, rivaling naval convoy shipments. German propaganda broadcaster Hans Fritsch mockingly called them the rats of Tobruk. The Australians embraced the name with pride. In October 1941, the 9th Division was withdrawn after 8 months. They had proven that adaptability and resourcefulness could overcome catastrophic supply failures. In June 1942, a new garrison of 33,000 well-supplied British, South African, and Indian troops defended Tobruk. When Axis forces attacked, the fortress fell in a single day. Prime Minister Winston Churchill reportedly turned pale upon hearing the news. The contrast was stark. 14,000 undersupplied Australians, relying heavily on captured weapons, held for 242 days. A year later, 33,000 fully equipped troops surrendered in 24 hours. In 1986, an Australian historian asked a veteran whether using stolen enemy weapons had been morally acceptable. The former soldier replied that at 20 years old, surrounded by the most dangerous army on earth, and given a weapon that jammed every time he fired it, he had one question. What was he supposed to do? Write a polite complaint to London? That answer captures the raw, unfiltered truth of Tobruk and the survival of the so-called rats who refused to die quietly.